Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this might have been the week to hope for an Independence Day from COVID, but instead the challenge has increased. We'll look at the numbers as well as the legislature, where the votes from this year's elongated session are now tallied. In sports, before we know the scores, we still have to see if the teams take the field. We'll look at the latest. Elsewhere, the death of a deacon who is implicated in the church sexual scandals brings to mind the court status of other claims. We'll examine. Joining us are tonight's informed sources. Jeff Duncan, sports reporter for The Athletic website and also WVUE-TV Fox 8. Tyler Bridges, reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. Kevin McGill, the reporter, The Associated Press. Ramon Antonio Vargas, reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. And Errol Laborde is off tonight. Well, we're going to get started with Kevin and our latest COVID update, and unfortunately, those numbers are going the wrong way.
Yeah, there's not a lot of good news this week. Overall, reported positive cases have been going up by the hundreds, and that would be expected as we do more and more robust testing around the state. Problem is that the percentage of positive cases has been going up, and the most immediate measure that would indicate that infections are indeed spreading, hospitalizations have been going up steadily. I think they've gone up to, they're over 800 now. And just a few weeks ago, they were down to 500. They're as high now or higher than they were in late March before we really skyrocketed up to 2,000. It hit a peak around 2,000 in April. These trends had last week, as we said here, led Governor Edwards to forestall the reopening of the state a little more up to phase 3. We were afraid this week he might even say we'll go back like a lot of well, not a lot, but a few other states have already. The virus is resurgent in 40 of 50 states. For now, it's status quo. We're remaining at at phase 2. But you're seeing more concern among leaders, and it's becoming more bipartisan. You're seeing calls for public masking. Some leaders are actually coming out and just making it a requirement at the local level. The mayor of Kenner yesterday, earlier in the week, Cynthia Lee Shang, the parish president in Jefferson, and the mayor of Baton Rouge. That comes after New Orleans had already been doing that. So those trends are kind of troubling. But interestingly, something that may give a little more credence to the leaders who are calling for masking. There was a study issued yesterday by Oxner Medical, study of Orleans and Jefferson. It was small, and it is not yet peer-reviewed, but among the interesting things they found is 75% of the people who tested positive in this study were asymptomatic while they were infectious. That is, they could be spreading the disease even though they weren't showing symptoms yet. They were either pre-symptomatic or not symptomatic. And again, that just kind of goes to show what medical experts have been saying for a while. It's going to be up to individuals to take more responsibility to try and keep this thing from spreading.
And of course, people who are asymptomatic can spread the disease. They may not be feeling anything or know they have it, but if they're infected, this disease can be shared.
Yeah, that's the point, and the fact is that although there are various studies on the effectiveness of masks and various types of masks in preventing you from catching the disease, if you have the disease and you are capable of spreading it, if you are infectious but don't know it, wearing a mask becomes more important to keep from spreading the disease, and that is the main reason that people for weeks now have been saying public masking is really a necessity if we're going, and social distancing, of course, if we're going to keep from spreading the disease. I checked with Dr. Joseph Canner this week, the head of Region 1 for the State Health Department. He reemphasized, he too, you look at that study with a bit of a grain of salt at this point because of the small size and because it's not yet peer-reviewed, but he said it does drive home the point of the importance of wearing a mask and social distancing. Again, something we discussed last week, and Dr. Canner said the data remains showing that there was not a significant amount of spread of the virus. It appears when all the protests were going on in late May and early June. And again, this didn't happen in other states, but we could tell in the New Orleans area, journalists who covered those protests said that people were wearing masks, and that appears to have helped in not spreading the disease. The economy's continuing to suffer. We had another big jump in unemployment claims today or yesterday, as reported by the state labor department. So it's a rocky road ahead. But again, at least we've got status quo. The governor has not clamped down any more or is not reversing in terms of closures. So that's one good sign. Other bit of good news in this, as opposed to April, we're not yet in any kind of panic mode in terms of hospital usage, in terms of hospital capacity. And Dr. Cantor was explaining that's because hospitals around the state are in better shape now. They've better prepared more space in the event of another surge. Again, it's not something we want to face because that affects health care for everyone if hospital capacity is used up.
Here in the New Orleans metro area, how are we looking in terms of the incidence of positive cases? Are we seeing it jump up a lot, or is it in other areas of the state more so than us?
It's increasing, but other areas have been going up. There was this, I was looking yesterday at a study by the Public Affairs Research Council that noted that New Orleans and Jefferson, and it's been going up more in Jefferson than in New Orleans, but the New Orleans area, we're not the big driver of the state's cases anymore. It's going up in a lot of regions. The Lake Charles area, Lafayette area is starting to see more cases. The Alexandria area. There really are few areas of the state where it's not a concern, but it's certainly a concern in New Orleans and Jefferson. But we aren't the drivers of that we were. I mean, New Orleans and Jefferson were responsible for a huge percentage of the cases back when we were a national hotspot, really an international hotspot.
Right.
Other areas of the state are driving it now.
So basically, the healthcare providers are urging us wear the mask, avoid
wear the mask, social distance,
avoiding big gatherings,
avoid crowds. It's the same advice that has been getting. Again, it's noticeable. The governor said, and governors of other states are saying this, it's really going to be up to individuals. There's only so much enforcement the state and locals can do, and they will be cracking down when they can. But it's going to be up to individuals to stop the spread of the disease. Right.
The governor did say that they would be making courtesy calls at businesses just to make sure that everything is being followed as it should.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see state fire marshal and local health code officials will be doing a lot to help enforce this.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Kevin. All right, Jeff, we're going to move over to you. Now, what does all this mean to sports, to the Pelicans, to the Saints, to the seasons that hopefully will be played?
Well, Marcia, sports with great trepidation are going forward right now. By and large, almost every major sports league has a plan that they are starting to enact. We know that PGA Tour, Professional Golf Association, has already started their 3 tournaments in. The 4th tournament's this weekend in Detroit. Major League Baseball has solved its labor negotiations, and they are announcing plans soon to start a 60-game abbreviated season that will begin either July 23rd or 24th. They haven't really announced that publicly yet when exactly it will start, but they have announced that they will have a season, and they will be playing in their own stadiums. And here in New Orleans, most fans are probably excited to hear about the New Orleans Pelicans returning to practice this week out at their facility in Metairie. They had 3 players that did test positive for the coronavirus. They're unnamed by the organization right now. They are in isolation and will be there until they pass a negative test. They have to have 2 consecutive negative tests to return to the team and be involved in team activities. That's NBA protocol. But the NBA is planning on holding their season. And again, it is a abbreviated 8-game schedule for every team. The Pelicans leave next week down to Orlando, Florida, where they will be in basically a bubble with 21 other teams, and they will complete the regular season. Basically play 8 games, each team in a bubble-like environment at the Disney World Sports Complex in Orlando. Lots of security going to be involved, lots of medical protocols trying to keep everyone confined to a campus-like landscape and try to prevent as best they can from any of these infections starting to break out. But I guess the good news is leagues are starting up. I think they've seen that the English Premier League was able to finish their schedule over in Europe, along with the Bundesliga, the German professional soccer league. They also have been playing, have not had a lot of issues. They've had some positive tests, but a very low amount of players have tested positive. And I think each league has executives over there at these leagues, at these stadiums, monitoring best practices, pros and cons, trying to learn what works, what doesn't work, so they can apply it to their individual leagues over here in America.
So how long will this truncated basketball season last then in Florida?
It's going to last. It's going to be a couple of weeks to play those eight games. And the Pelicans are going to be trying to play their way into the playoffs, Marcia. They're right now on the outside looking in, and the league is set up as best they could this kind of gerrymandered schedule to make it fair so the teams that, when the season ended, that were still in playoff contention have a chance to still play their way into the playoffs. And the Pelicans certainly were playing so much better at the end of the season. Once Zion Williamson came back, they feel confident that they might be able to make their way in.
Okay, let's touch now quickly on the Saints. Well, what's been going on with that? How are they preparing for the season, and how is that supposed to start?
Yeah, some news announced this week. Looks like training camp's going to begin July 28th. Players reporting to training camp. The preseason, I think, is very much up in the air. The league's already announced that 2 of those 4 preseason games are not going to be played. The first and fourth preseason game. Each team basically will play 2 preseason games, 1 at home, 1 on the road. But they're going forward with plans to start the regular season under the normal schedule, which would begin the first week of September. Now, whether fans show up or not, I think remains to be seen. None of those decisions have been made yet. And certainly no fans will be allowed, unfortunately, at training camp out in Metairie. I know that's always a very popular destination for Saints fans, but it's just not going to be feasible or practical right now under these conditions.
When will that start, the training camp?
July 28th out at Airline Drive.
Okay. All right. So what have they been doing in the interim just to try to keep in shape? Have they been doing video conferencing or something?
Well, players have been working out on their own, at least the New Orleans Saints. They've been basically allowed to work out on their own. Sean Payton said, show up in the last week of July. I'm leaving it up to you to come and report to camp in the best shape you can be in. They all have their own personal trainers working out individually. And certainly if they want to, they can work out over video conference the way you mentioned with the team's training staff. And I know some of the younger players are doing that. They can't quite afford yet some of the personal trainers that some of the veterans have. So I think it's going to be interesting to see once they show up in late July what kind of shape everyone's in. They're going to have 90 players out there. So there's still a lot that remains to be seen how they handle that, because there's so many more players involved in football than, say, basketball. And
no spectators. I mean, spectators are such a big part, particularly of any sports, really. That's going to be very strange. Have to pump in some cheering from somewhere.
Well, it was strange seeing the first leg of the Triple Crown last month. The Belmont Stakes were run up in New York with no fans, and that was very, very strange to see that race take place. Okay.
All right, Jeff. Thanks a lot. Ramon, we're going to go on over to you right now. We heard this week that a priest accused of sexually abusing boys died, a deacon. Has died this week. So that was George Brignac. That leaves the question, for the victims, they don't get their days in court.
Yeah, so he was facing trial in connection with allegations of rape against one boy in the late 70s, early 80s. The victim in that case is now a grown-up, of course, and I know that he had spoken before Brignac's death about how he was frustrated about how long it was taking to get the trial in Louisiana and Orleans Parish, specifically those rape is a life sentence, mandatory life sentence crime, first-degree rape, which is what Brignac was charged with, and so was murder. And those are 2 of the cases that take the longest to get the trial anyway. When you throw in the coronavirus pandemic, which shut down the courthouse, and for the most part, just like it did many other entities, it obviously slowed down an already drawn-out process. I think the victim understood that, but still, yesterday. Still, when George Brignac died on Monday, the victim was, of course, just disappointed that he would not be able to stay in court. And I guess the truth about what happened in that case, I guess died. I mean, the full story died obviously with George Brignac.
Now, Brignac had been jailed. Is that correct? And then there was an accident where he broke his back. What happened there?
So he had been in jail. He was indicted in December and was given a $1 million bail. He did post a bond for his release. His attorney said he was injured at the lockup. I know that the lockup, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office, which runs the city's lockup, certainly said that. I think kind of questioned whether he was injured there or if he showed up with the injury. But I know that Brignac's side claimed that he was injured at the jail. He spent the end of his life at a nursing home, and he was kind of bouncing in between a nursing home and Truro Infirmary. And he ended up passing away at Truro Infirmary. I know his defense attorney, Martin Regan, said that he never really recovered from that injury, and so therefore spent the end of his days mostly bedridden. I think at one point he lost his ability to speak, and that's kind of how he lived out the end of his days.
Other cases are in civil court. This was the only one in criminal court. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there were several civil lawsuits that spell out various allegations of abuse against various clergymen, both living and dead. They were mostly being pursued in state court. Those cases are now indefinitely on hold after the Archdiocese filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections. It's also known as reorganization, which they said was necessary due to some financial struggles amid the coronavirus pandemic, as well as litigating said abuse cases that we mentioned. And so those are on hold while the bankruptcy plays out. The bankruptcy is in its very early stages. Just Thursday, the church asked for a bar date, which is a deadline for any claims abuse otherwise predating the May 1st bankruptcy filing, for a September 29th deadline for those claims to be made. The Claims Committee in this case, which is largely made up of clergy abuse victims, is going to fight for a longer time frame. Their attorney told me that to them a reasonable one might be in February of next year, and it just has to do with certain dates of filings and finalized paperwork that is generated by the bankruptcy case. Okay.
All right, Ramon. Thanks a lot for that. Okie doke. Now, over to you, Tyler. The legislature has been in session. Actually, the session started in March, right? And then it was interrupted because of COVID. And so they didn't meet for a while. Went on back, and then it's unusual. They went back in special session, but it was not called by the governor.
Right. It was only the second time that the legislators themselves called themselves into a special session. Normally the governor does that. Normally the governor dictates what goes on in the Capitol, but we are seeing now really legislative independence that has grown over time, and I think we're seeing the full flowering of it now with this Republican legislature. It's really the most conservative Republican legislature we have seen. And so we've seen this legislature with an agenda that's directly at odds with the Democratic governor.
So then what has been the result of this in seeing, these political differences between the governor and between the legislature? How did the governor do with what he wanted or did not want to have happen in this legislative session?
Yeah, well, March 9th was the first day that the session began. That's the day when the governor addressed the joint session, and that's the day the governor announced the first infected case, first infection in Louisiana was March 9. You think back to where we were. I was just thinking about that when Kevin was talking. And then they recessed a week later, and they were gone for 6 weeks. And the governor had to shelve his agenda. His agenda was to have more money for teachers, more money for K through 12 schools, and more money for colleges and universities. And after that, he was simply playing defense against the Republican initiatives to provide more money for business, and the biggest issue, which in Baton Rouge is called tort reform. It's trying to make it harder for car accident victims and their lawyers to get big payouts. Well, that was an issue that dominated the session.
And so let's talk about that piece of legislation, because that could certainly impact us all. What happened with that? We saw one version and then another version. What ultimately now is going to become law? Sure. So again, reflecting this Republican independence from the governor, something we didn't, you never saw before. The Republicans passed their own version of this bill. It was the last day of the regular session. The governor said, I'm sorry, this goes too far. It doesn't mandate more competition. It won't bring down insurance rates. So he vetoed that bill. And one of the reasons that the Republican leadership wanted to go into a special session was to have the chance to override him. They did not have the 2/3 votes that they needed in both the House and the Senate to do so. So they pushed forward a different version of these bills, which change the various procedures and laws for if somebody's injured, how they can pursue a lawsuit. And so then on the final day of the special session, which was Tuesday, they passed a different version, a version I don't think the governor particularly liked, but it had been watered down enough that in the end, both sides accepted it. So the governor said he would sign it into law. Okay, so this is now going to be the law. And so this pertains to, is this just auto accidents and how filings could be made, lawsuits filed regarding an auto accident claim? Right. The Louisiana Association of Business and Industry was really the prime mover behind it. They're the biggest, most powerful lobby in Baton Rouge. And they and others in the business community say that Louisiana is it's too friendly to trial lawyers, that there's all sorts of frivolous lawsuits, and particularly in the car accidents. Louisiana does have the second highest insurance rates for vehicles in the country. So this was pushed as a way to bring down car insurance rates. Now, the critics of the bill said, well, this won't actually happen. But in the end, the Republican leadership made enough changes in the bill that it became acceptable to the governor. Very technical changes. Mm-hmm. Hopefully none of us will ever have to worry about this by being in a car accident. But again, it's a reflection of the increased independence that this Republican legislature has with its own agenda against the Democratic governor, who has the veto pen that turned out to be an impregnable last line of defense. Will this legislation limit an individual's ability to sue? Yeah, in certain cases it'll make it harder, and it will make it harder for people to collect big judgments. The critics of the bill say that it will clog up the courts, so people will have take longer to even get justice. Mm-hmm. But the business community says it's going to bring down rates. And it is expected to be laws. The governor is expected to sign off on it. Governor has said that he will sign it into law. Yeah. All right, Tyler, thanks a lot. Jeff, we're going to go back over to you. And while we talked about the possibility of seasons and what it may look like or may not look like, we do still anticipate that there will be a basketball season and a football season. So let's talk about the teams and the talent they have. And if things can move along, what kind of seasons will we see?
Well, I think there's a lot of reason to be confident in both the Pelicans and the Saints this season. The Pelicans, as we said, are going to have an 8-game season here to try and play their way into the playoffs. The deck is kind of stacked against them because they are 3.5 games behind the Memphis Grizzlies for that final playoff spot. They don't have a lot of time, Marcia, to make up 3.5 games. Right. So it's going to be kind of difficult, I think, for them to play their way in. But their schedule, that 8-game schedule, is much easier, at least on paper, than the one that the Memphis Grizzlies play. So I do think there's a strong possibility that they would get into a potential play-in game tournament, 3-game tournament against Memphis. The way the team was playing at the end of the year, there's reason to believe that they can get that done. Their first 2 games right out of the bat, they play July 30th. They play the very first game in the NBA restart schedule on July 30th against the Utah Jazz at 5:30. So we're going to find out very quickly. Utah is one of the better teams in the league. We'll find out very quickly their chances. They've got to get off to a good start. Now, the Saints, look, we know the last 3 years they've won more games than any team in the NFL. They've fallen short of expectations, unfortunately, in the playoffs. Sometimes not of their own doing. We know the officiating didn't help them 2 years ago. But this is a team that's still locked and loaded, Marcia. They're going to be a Super Bowl contender again this season, with or without fans in the stands. And I think that, if I'm going to leave the viewers with anything today, I think that the days of attending live sport events are up in the air right now. I don't know if we're going to see that this season.
Oh, wait, Jeff,
Right
are
now.
you still there? Have we lost Jeff? Jeff?
No, I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you.
Keep talking.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, I feel like there's so much uncertainty with the virus and the limitations right now the leagues are trying to put on how many people can be at the actual stadiums. I think the fans are going to end up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, this is the world we're in today. With this virtual connection, sometimes doesn't always work out. Jeff, are you still there? There you go. Did I see eyes blink?
Yes.
Can you just finish up that thought about the Saints?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I think they're going to have a great chance to make it back to the Super Bowl, and I think this is going to be more than likely Drew Brees' last season. And that's what's unfortunate. If we don't have fans, it might be an impossibility for fans to get out to get a chance to see Drew Brees play one final time.
Oh, boy. I don't know. That would be a heartbreak. All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. All right, guys, we got to wrap this up right now. I'm going to go around the table. Kevin, starting with you. Other news out there. What should we be hearing about, too? Real quick, about 15 seconds each.
Yeah, I think we've kind of overwhelmed, ironically, news of criminal justice reform efforts. The consent decrees that govern both the jail and the police department, and some efforts by local authorities to say, "Look, we've reformed, and it's time to get out of those." And we'll be looking at that in the coming weeks and months. All righty, Ramon, over to you. What other news?
I should have this weekend new details on another abuse claim involving a prominent Catholic institution in New Orleans. Should be on the website and in the paper at some point over the holiday weekend.
All right, Ramon, thank you. Tyler, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I've got a story that I'm going to mention, which involves the former parish president of Jefferson, Aaron Broussard. I'll be profiling him now that he's been out of prison for a few years. He's has kind of a prison ministry, and he's got a new book out. It's a how-to book for people who are going to be going to prison.
Okay, and Jeff, let's wrap it up with you, and hopefully we can keep you.
Yeah, sure. Jari Evans and Roman Harper, two former Saints greats, inducted into the Saints Hall of Fame. And that Hall of Fame, by the way, is going to be moving over to the New Orleans Center, and it's going to be run by the New Orleans Historic Collection starting in the year 2021. So look for that to be a nice new spread over there in the New Orleans Center for fans.
For the Historic New Orleans Collection is going to be running that?
Yes, they're going to be running. It's part of the renovation of the Superdome now, so they're going to move it, take advantage of that.
Historic New Orleans Collection is just a treasure in this city. Okay, guys, so are you all, too. Thank you so much from your various locations. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and have a safe and happy 4th. See you next week. Good evening.